Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm so excited to share this episode with you because it was recorded way back then in 2021, straight after the COVID lockdown. And it's one that has really stayed with me to this day because Geeta shares how she has taken her personal experience with burnout and turned it into sustained hustle. The podcast at the time was called Adapt, so you will hear that referenced quite often. But also you will find her new updated links in the show notes. Enjoy! Geeta, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really pleased to have you here.
Hi, Mbali. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here too. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and your listeners.
You and I met at the Sustainability Institute in Stellenbosch, and I think that was around 2015,
Yes.
2016. And I think we never really had any personal conversations, but I definitely remember thinking, well, I'm curious about that person or their story. And the closest kind of sad part of it is that the closest we've come to being friends was on Facebook. Yeah.
Well, thank goodness, because it kept us connected over all these years.
Yeah, totally. And that's actually how I got to see what you're up to now. And I was pretty interested to have you as a guest. So yeah, really excited to do this. You know, it's tradition on the show to have like a short introduction by our guests, and we call it your adapt story. If you can just give us a short summary of who you are, what you're doing, and what your adapt story is. No limits. Go for it.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So, hello everybody. My name is Geeta Morar, and I am a mixed race millennial woman based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I have a day job in sustainability and climate change, and as Mbali mentioned, a side hustle that's really focused on health and wellness and nutrition coaching, particularly for women who are very driven and who really work towards making a positive difference either in their lives or through the work that they do, but who may also be struggling with burnout, exhaustion, managing their energy, managing their time with conflicting demands. And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about that's come through my own journey is, once you find your passion or your purpose in your career or in your life, it's almost like a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you get up every day and you have all the energy and you can work for 12, 15 hours every day because you love it and you can see the benefit of the work that you do. But that really comes at a cost to your health if not managed carefully. And so I guess one of the things, that was a lesson that I learned quite the hard way.
We're all about the lessons.
Exactly. Well, a lot of what I do now is try and share that story and share sort of, tips and tools and coaching processes with similar women to help them through, because at the end of the day, it's about you and about feeling your best and doing the work that you find most meaningful without having to pay such a high personal health cost.
Wow, thanks for that, Agita. I think you touched on so many like golden nuggets that my brain is like, oh my gosh, okay. So I'm going to try and keep it controlled and not get lost in asking you 5,000 questions. And I think just maybe one core question about that is, do you think that something like a life or career life balance exists? Because you did talk about the costs that we have to pay to maintain, like a career, for example. But does that mean that there's an optimal where you can balance the two, or what is your perspective?
That's a really great question. And it speaks to this idea of a work-life balance, which I think in my experience on a daily basis is a myth. If if you think about women particularly, they've got many roles within their lives. They might be mothers, they might be career women, they might be spouses, they might be partners, they might be friends and part of a really supportive friend structure. And with those demands playing on yourself and on your time and on your energy on a daily basis all the time, to try and put yourself under huge amounts of pressure to make sure that you touch on all of those bases all the time, and you manage to, in addition to that, have time for yourself, I think by the end of it, you're going to be a bit of a burnt out, stressed out wreckage. And so, I mean, that's not to say that there aren't women who are doing that already, but in my experience, it's really about looking at your life from a more holistic perspective and saying, all right, well, what are the things I want to achieve for me? What kind of mother do I want to be? What kind of colleague do I want to be? Where do I want my career goal to go, my career life to go? What are my goals? What are my aspirations? And looking at how to balance those out sort of in the big picture. So there will be times when you have to step back from your career and take care of family. There will be times where you've got to put your energy into career and get support to help with your other goals and your other roles. But the important thing to remember is that it's almost like a dance between these sets of responsibilities. And
Mm.
in between all of that, it's important to remember to take care of yourself and not to lose track of what it is you wanted to achieve for yourself. Because a lot of the time, burnout comes as a result of people giving everything of them to everyone else and forgetting to fill their own cup
Oh,
and to look
wow.
after themselves. And
Great.
so, yeah, I guess maintain your health on a daily basis, and then otherwise to find a balance between everything else on a weekly, on a monthly basis, and to find a workable routine to fit all of that together can help with that, with getting that life balance. And it may not necessarily be on a daily basis.
I wouldn't have said it better, but also I like how you said people who generally burn out are people who have given too much of themselves. And I can totally relate to that. I can't remember a time where I've had a perfect balance in all the different spheres of my life. It's always been a bit more of this or a bit more of this. But I just can't remember having a perfect work life balance, even at the best times of my life. So that's a really interesting perspective. And how do you then reframe it? Like, what is just in terms of redefining work-life balance? Do you have a different term that you use, or do you have like an analogy that people can use that helps us to shift away from this ratio, between work and life and to go into a more holistic way of seeing it? I really like that.
Yeah. So I think maybe I'm going to take a short step back and explain sort of the origins of my perspective, and then I'll let you know sort of what it is.
Yeah.
And so when I first came into this field of sustainability, it was an incredible mind-shift change. You go from seeing the world in one way, you go through this very intensive learning process, and you end up seeing it in a completely different way.
Mm.
And in that process, I think I had given a lot of myself to my studies, given a lot to the groups of friends that I was with at the time. I had given a lot to a relationship that ended up being quite toxic for me. And so through that process, I ended up burning out quite badly, to the extent that, 2016 was the year I collapsed on the 1st of January, 2016. And I
Okay.
ended up having to take a whole year out of my life to recover. And that year was difficult. It was something that I'd never had to face before, because I didn't understand physically what was wrong with me. The doctors were not able to help. And so on top of having this fear of how to get better, I had this deep-seated exhaustion. So on a daily basis, I had to make choices of, okay, it's the morning now. Do I want to have a shower or do I want to make breakfast? Because there isn't energy for both. And then in
Okay.
the afternoon, I would do the other things. So if I had breakfast in the morning, I would shower in the afternoon. If I had, the shower in the morning, I would then eat in the afternoon. And for a year, that was how I had to think about how I could get things done. Like, okay, you have energy for one thing. What is it? And over time, as I eventually did find an integrated health doctor who was able to explain, sort of what happens when you burn out physically, how those systems of your body kind of unravel, and how you've got to use nutrition and lifestyle and, in some cases, medication to get your body back into a place where it is functioning in a way that is healing rather than undermining itself and deteriorating itself. And in that process, I realized that balance is not about making sure you tick all the boxes every day. It's about making sure that you have time to use the energy that you have, but you also need time to replenish that energy. And so I started thinking about my personal physical energy like almost like a bank account. And so if I needed to do, as I got better and I needed to do one or two things in a day, I would have to budget time in my mind the next day or 2 days after that to rest. Because, I might have been chasing a deadline that day, or I might have been having to, travel or whatever it might be. And so
Mm.
I've got to be able to make sure that I'm eating well, I'm sleeping well, and I can make that commitment. But afterwards, I would need to rest. And so when I think about this work-life balance, it's about, on a whole, now that I'm much better, it's about looking at, okay, what do I want to achieve in the next couple of months in my career, or, in my career and in my relationship, for example. And working out, okay, well, this week there's a deadline. It's going to be quite stressful. I will then have to negotiate with a partner or with a family and say, look, I'm going to need time here. I don't have time for all of you, but I need to focus on this piece of, this deadline or this piece of work. And afterwards, I'm going to need a day of rest. And on that day, we can maybe have lunch together, or, we could go for a walk in the park, or just have a chilled day in your PJs hanging around the house. And so it's about finding a way of balancing that energy need and that energy replenishment is how I think about achieving some kind of balance between work and life.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's really helpful, but also just as you were saying it, I'm thinking of the flow of energy, because you were talking about a balance of energy instead of this, I don't know, this siloed approach in the work-life balance where you think of, here's one box, here's another box, and then you've got this much, and you're trying to balance your life in each of these little boxes. So I like that, the flow of energy, and rather balancing that. I don't know a lot about burnout. It's something that I am learning about and hearing about. I've seen a few YouTube videos. I went through the ebook that you offer, and that's also very nice. Thanks for putting that together. I think you can share the details of that with the people later, because there's a link on To Stay in the Hustle where Geeta offers some helpful tips in her ebook. And so my question is, what exactly is burnout, Geeta? Is it, I'm pretty sure it's different for everybody, but maybe in your case, could you define that, or at least just when did you know you had burnout, even before the doctor told you or named it?
No, I think that is a really great question, because a lot of people who are struggling with it may not know that that's what it is. And it's a tricky one because there isn't a clinical diagnosis for it. So what people with burnout generally struggle with is, extreme lack of energy. You might open your eyes in the morning and think, how am I going to get through the day? Like you've slept a whole night and you're still empty. You might also be struggling with sleep, but you are so tired, but you can't fall asleep. That's another key symptom. You might be under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, feeling anxious. For me, the key flagpole I always keep an eye out for is I get really snappy and irritable with people over small things. And that's a key for me to realize, like, okay, you need to just, let's get back on the bandwagon. Let's pull it all together and take some time out.
Yeah.
Because burnout is really it's a spectrum. You can be mildly sort of run down, and there are, signs and symptoms for that, or you can experience full-blown burnout where you just feel like everything is too much. You might get another email and think, oh, I can't face this now. And it's just an email. You feel overwhelmed by things. You might, be struggling with feelings of depression, feelings of anxiety, and dealing with a lot of stress. And so it's also, a set of symptoms where if you go to a doctor and you say, I'm feeling this and I'm feeling this and I'm feeling this, they could be related to other conditions. And so what a doctor would have to do is diagnose burnout by testing for the range of things that could be wrong with you and ruling them all out. And so you're constantly going through a process of feeling really sick, feeling really tired, and like you cannot cope anymore. Going to a doctor and they run a bunch of tests and they come back to you and say, oh, you can't really find anything wrong with you. Maybe you're just tired, and you are feeling beside yourself, and you're now being told that they cannot actually find anything wrong with you. So you start to doubt, like, am I going crazy? What is wrong with me? Maybe I'm just not strong enough for all of this. And so there's two ways in which you can sort of tell that you might be heading towards burnout, and that would be looking at how you feel, and are you experiencing any of the symptoms that I mentioned just now, or you could kind of get onto the specialist bandwagon, and your stomach you might be having stomach issues, and so they'll do a scope for your stomach and tell you, no, you don't have celiac disease, everything is fine. And you might be feeling super depressed, and they'll say, okay, well, maybe you have depression, here's the medication. And if you look at how sort of conventional doctors and conventional medicine deals with burnout, it's symptomatically. So they can give you a
Mhm.
sleeping pill to help you sleep.
Like most
They
things.
can give you some anti-anxiety medication to help you. Exactly. To help you not feel anxious, or they might suggest that you go on to antidepressants. And if you need that stuff, of course, conventional medicine has its place and it has a role to play. But there is a school of medicine that's built around, it's called integrated functional medicine. And that looks at the body more holistically. And so that, functional medicine doctors often have a conventional medical degree and specialize in functional medicine. And they start to understand, like, what is the immune system? How does it work with the endocrine system, for example? And how does stress play on those two systems? And when those systems are out of sync, what are the symptoms that you get? And so if you've been on this sort of specialist merry-go-round and you can't find what is wrong with you, finding a integrated functional medical professional might be a good next step for you, because they can help you. They can do tests to understand, like, are your hormones out of balance? What's happening with your adrenal glands? How is that affecting and causing some of the symptoms you have? And it involves tests, sort of hormone level tests, vitamin deficiency tests, and all of that kind of thing to identify where you might be run down, where things might be out of balance. And the treatment regime is then sort of a negotiated process that you do together with your healthcare professional.
Okay.
And so those are really the two ways in which burnout can be diagnosed and can be dealt with. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for sharing that.
Not
I
sure
mean,
if I answered your question.
no, you did, because I think for me, it's always this whole podcast is about learning from people's journeys. And also, just even before we jump into sustain the hustle, it's so eye opening to know about this. Like, for example, I didn't know about integrated functional medicine, like what you mentioned, and I'm going to look it up after this. So thanks for that. But also, I wanted to mention the period, right? So you've told us about your burnout period, and then you had a year to take off. I have two practical questions. So the one is, how did you then manage to get the time off? How did you survive during the time off? And also then, I assume, because I don't have a lot of knowledge about this topic, is that burnout isn't something that you recover from and then you're 100% like back to normal, like you bounce back? Or is it something like that where you can just bounce back and it's completely gone? Or is it something that has long-term effects that you need to deal with a more mild level, but still there with you all the time? How does that work?
Yeah. No, fantastic questions. I think I'm going to start with your second question first
Okay.
and talk a bit about the recovery process from burnout. And I think it really depends on what your core burnout trigger is. So burnout, sort of, if you look at the official definition of burnout from the World Health Organization, is it's something that is it's something that comes about from being under a lot of stress. And usually the stress is very work related. So you're working long hours, you have very stressful deadlines, the stakes are high, and you're under that stress for a prolonged period of time. And the kind of the classical ways to deal with that is, it sort of becomes your manager's problem and they've got to reduce the work. And then they'll say, well, it's your problem. You're not managing your work-life balance properly. Here's some extra hours, take a holiday, take 3 days off.
Yep.
And the thing about burnout is, once you get to the stage where you're burnt out, 2 days of holiday is not going to make a difference,
Yeah.
because there's two parts to it. The one is stress management. And if you're not coping with the stress management, it starts to impact the systems that I'd spoken about before: your adrenals, your hormonal system, your immune system, and so on. And so if your stressor is work related, you've got to look at how that is playing on your stress levels, how your stress levels impact your adrenal system, and so on. And once your hormone levels are out of balance, once your adrenals are flat, that becomes, a medical question. It becomes a question of prolonged rest. And that's really the key, is the prolonged rest. But you can also have burnout that is triggered by, it can be triggered by a combination of things, but the core trigger is that you're stuck in a toxic relationship. And so if you're doing all this medical stuff and you're taking time off work, but you're still in the relationship, it may not be the most healing process if you're not also working on the nature of the relationship, either getting out of it or working on how, how things can be improved, how you can work through the challenges with a partner. Another core, it's very complicated. Another core trigger of burnout could be an illness. And so in my case, I had a virus called Epstein-Barr virus or mononucleosis or glandular fever, has many names. But basically, it's a virus that sort of stays dormant in your system. And when you're very run down, it sort of emerges and it feels a bit like the flu, but ultimately it runs your immune system down far. And so when your health is down, work becomes more stressful, people become more stressful, like you're just not strong enough to cope with any of it.
Yeah.
So identifying what is your core burnout trigger is a key part of your healing. And then it's a journey. So depending on how far down the line you went, so there's different levels of being burnt out, as I mentioned before. I went to the extreme where I was medically boarded for a year or,
Wow. Okay.
and, in that time, I think I was very fortunate that I was still doing my master's project. And so I didn't have to negotiate leave with an employer. And what I ended up doing was staying at actually my mother's house in Simonstown. So I was quite privileged in the situation. I had a house. I didn't have to pay rent. I did have to use my savings and fork out another year of fees because I did not meet my master's deadlines.
Yeah.
But in that time, because my core burnout trigger had been the virus and sort of the toxic social situation that I'd found myself in and the very stressful work situation, I removed myself from that context completely. Like, for all intents and purposes, I was pretty isolated from the outside world. I stayed at this house alone with my dog for
Okay.
8 months. And for the first 2 months, I was just there. I'd given up. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was wrong with me. All I knew is that I didn't have enough energy to take a shower or
Yeah.
to eat or to, whatever it would be. I could feed the dog because I had to.
Yes.
And after a while, sort of my parents were in Joburg and eventually they realized, no, something is really not up. So they sent, my poor dad was the ambassador that had to come and knock on my door and ask me to let him in. And I had refused by that point to see any other doctors. I had refused because I was just sick of being told there's nothing wrong with me, but there was clearly something wrong.
Yes.
He was very helpful in the sense that he just came and he sat with me. He didn't, nag me about the relationship. He didn't nag me about why I was not doing my work. I was on the couch all day and he sat next to me on the couch all day. He listened to his music and read things on his iPad. And eventually, he'd found out about this integrated functional medicine doctor in Cape Town. And he'd suggested it to me in the beginning and I refused. And then the one day he said to me, let's go for a drive. You seem a little bit better today. So I grumpily got in the car and he took me straight to the doctor. And that's how I got there. And I think one of the big turning points there was I'd sat in this doctor's room and I glared at him. And I was just daring him to tell me that there was nothing wrong with me. And he listened to my story and he did some tests and he came back and he just gave me a hug. And he's like, you have taken an incredible beating. Like, it's okay. We're going to get you better. I cried. And what he was able to do is just help me understand like how what I was eating was not helping me. When your immune system collapses to that extent, you become allergic or sensitive to things that you never had sensitivities to before.
Mm.
And a number of foods that I was continuing to eat that were actually making my situation worse. And I didn't know that. I was deficient. I think I had the lowest levels of vitamin D3 that he had ever seen in a patient. And so it was about getting back onto those nutrients, getting back onto a diet, like a very simple diet. Probiotics was a key thing. And so for those months in Cape Town, I really just put time into making sure that I woke up and I ate what I needed to eat and I took my medication and I rested.
Yeah.
Repeat. And after 8 months, I was eventually strong enough to get back into my thesis and so on. So it is a process. You don't necessarily have to be at that point to realize that you need to change something. And so I've worked with clients. I haven't worked with clients who have been that far burnt out yet. But, you might be realizing that you're on this path, towards a burnout. And it really helps to reach out. And that's sort of the point of that. And actually, that's not true. I have had one person and her core stressor was her job, but she was not going to quit her job. She's like a very high achieving person, very dedicated to her work. But it was wiping her out.
Yeah.
And in the end, I said to her, look, you've got to get your health back on track because without your health, you cannot do this job. And
Yeah.
so her journey started from that angle. And there have been other journeys that other people have started with. Yeah. So it depends where you are.
Yeah, no, that's super like interesting for me because I don't know, I'm just drawn also to your individual journey because I think everybody is different, and just to hear your side about what you went through and the process that you went through is really, really insightful. I also, I don't know, I'm just having this thought that maybe we also have pockets of burnout along the way that are just maybe short term, or like you said, if you have some stresses on you, or, because I can totally, I mean, if someone asked me that question, have you had pockets of burnout? I feel like my answer would be yes, because I have felt at times very short term that, okay, well, I feel really tired. I'm just fatigued. I'm done over, and I need to just remove myself from the heaviness of everything and just find space to recover and rest. So that's also just what I thought about now when you were speaking.
I think you're exactly right. And I think that's normally the point at which my clients would approach me, depending on what their core trigger might be. So one client has just had 2 children, and her levels of burnout also came. It's sort of they happen after the first child, and then happen after the second child, and now have happened again after a year after the second child. And it's not that she ended up incapable of doing anything. It's just that, what they don't mention in the definition of burnout is that it's also like it's got to do with overall health. And
Yeah.
so after doing something that takes a lot out of you, you've got to put it back. You've got to
Yeah.
put the nutrients back and do the lifestyle thing. And so, yeah, you can recover it from without that, but it takes time. It arguably would take longer.
Yeah, it also sounds like a natural process as well. Like when it's well regulated, our bodies need rest anyway. That's the reason why we sleep every day. And I'm just wondering now, so how did you then go from, okay, the next thing I need to do is take a shower and then have a meal and address my nutrition, and then maybe go out for a walk, and then maybe start picking up a book, and then I'm starting on my thesis again to sustain the hustle? Because that's your adapt story, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I think following that year, I did manage to eventually submit my thesis, and then in about May of 2018, 2017, I managed to get my first job. And what that looked like was I'd submitted my thesis, I was getting a bit stronger, and I then joined a startup working in a field completely unrelated to sustainability because I thought I need to get away from the sustainability stuff. It's too heavy. It's too sad. It's too scary. Like I can't be in this space all the time.
Yeah.
And getting back on my feet in that job was very much a negotiated process with my manager at the time. And I said to her, look, this is where I've been. This is what I need in order to be a functional employee. I need to start at 9. I need to finish at 3. I need a rest, and I will continue working between 7 and 9.
Okay.
And so learning how to balance energy and communicate and negotiate that process with the concerned and accommodating employer was really, really important for me.
Yeah.
And after a year of being with her, I then thought, okay, no, I'm strong enough now. I can, and I do actually want to get back into the sustainability world. I want to work on issues of climate change and mitigation and that kind of thing. And so I'd made my move across to the organization I'm working at now. And even then, it took a good couple of years before I was able to get a handle on the job, grow in the position to a point where I had, a team. And now, so the point that I'm at, just before the pandemic hit, I was able to cope with my job. We had spent the year before traveling all over the world. I did not collapse again, which was a big fear of mine. But because, I'd had all this sort of this routine and this structure and this nutritional plan in place that I'd been working on for the last 4 years. And really, having gotten much stronger and having a bit of that excess energy when the pandemic hit and we all started working from home, I realized that I actually, I'm using less energy every day because, I'm sitting in my lounge on Zoom for most of the day, but I'm
Yeah.
not having to drive to work and walk here and catch the train and go to the airport. And, so physically, I was resting more in a way, even though sort of intellectually I was working more.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this for the first time, everyone in the world has had a similar experience
Yeah.
with this pandemic.
Sorry to jump in, Geeta, but before I
Mm.
lose this thought, how has moving to Zoom affected you? Because yes, I agree. Like I've been in home office, and even though it's been great being at home because I can do five other things, like I can do the laundry and I can make a smoothie, like
Whenever you feel
beating.
like it.
And it's just, I can sit on the balcony and enjoy the sun. And I mean, I'm in Germany. So when there is sunshine, it's really like, oh my gosh, having a smoothie on the balcony during work hours is such a gift. Running the machine as well. And then also like chopping up vegetables for supper. Like it sounds silly and simplistic, but for me, these are like the treasures of home office. And at the same time, I've definitely gone through Zoom fatigue. And what I've started doing, I
Absolutely.
think for the last 6 months, is that I stopped putting my video on. So I will say hi to everybody in the meeting
Mhm.
and then I'll switch my video off because I find that Zoom just really has taken it out of me. And yeah, so I'm pretty curious to hear how you've experienced that.
So absolutely. And I think it's admirable that it took you so many months to get to that point. I did 2 weeks and I was like, nope, this camera thing is not happening.
Yeah.
We're not there. Yeah, so we've been at home office since March 2020. And it was really interesting to go through the whole process because when the lockdown hit, everybody panicked. And my partner, who I'd been in a relationship for 3 months, was like, oh, I'm moving in with you. And I was like, what? I live with my mom at the moment and my brother. And my brother had just quit his job. So he moved back home. And yeah, my partner moved in with my family because we wouldn't have been able to see each other for that time, and he was like, "Nope,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
going to happen." We got into this beautiful routine of, sort of working 9 to 5, definitely making sure that we turn the cameras or, that the Zoom meetings stop at a certain time. We all cooked dinner together and we would eat together. And while that's, sort of normal for some families, like my family doesn't really operate like that. My parents are divorced. My mom works a lot. We may or may not have had a meal together at some point. But this was like 3 months of that kind of
Okay.
structure. And it was lovely. I think, on Saturdays, we'd all clean the house together. On Sundays, we would bake something or like, it was like a really cute routine. And it was like a great way to cope with all the
Yeah.
stress and fear of the pandemic. But after that, I think our lockdown restrictions lifted a little bit and my partner moved out, my brother got his job and my mom went back to work and I was still at home
Mhm.
alone, day in and day out. And on the one hand, it was really cool because, as I said, like physically, I was getting so much better and so much stronger and feeling less drained every day. But it was heavy and it is
Mhm.
heavy still. And I definitely found that I did, you start to let certain things go. You think, oh, do I really need to take my vitamins this morning? I'm not going anywhere. Or actually, you know what? I've been sitting at home alone the whole day. I'm just going to eat cake for supper, you know? So from a health perspective, like as the stress of being isolated kind of started to ramp up, I realized that I was heading burnout way. Maybe not
Yeah.
the whole way, but definitely feeling run down. This thing of having the camera on
Yeah.
all the time. We eventually had a staff meeting about it and decided actually we don't have to do it because it's a lot. You have to sit in the same place, like you
Yes,
can't move.
exactly.
And yeah, and those long hours of sitting, I mean, sitting is the new
Mhm.
smoking, right? It's probably the worst thing you can do for hours and
Yeah.
hours in a day. But I also find this load of multitasking has multiplied. Like you are always doing 2 or 3 things at the
Yes.
same time. You're in a call. I sometimes have two calls. I've got one on my phone. I've got one on my computer. I'm trying to prepare for the third one that's happening later on. And this feeling of being very frazzled has become the theme of my life recently because although you're sitting alone in your house, you're plugged into
Mhm.
this world that just is so demanding and just it needs your attention everywhere because you'll get a phone call, you get a WhatsApp, your team needs this,
Yeah.
you're presenting, and it's hectic. And so they're trying to find a workable routine obviously changed. I had dedicated a good like a lunch break walk
Same.
and I live quite close to a place called the West Cliff Stairs. So it's like quite an intense walk up two very steep flights of stairs, and then you can do a circuit and come back to the house. And to manage energy, like what I found really helped is to take that afternoon walk every day because I'll walk in the morning before I start. But if I don't have that afternoon walk, I could easily sit at my desk until 9
Wow.
o'clock at night, straight through from 9
Wow.
until 9.
Okay.
And that's don't
Yes,
do that.
please don't do that, Geeta. Even
It
I'm
doesn't
saying
work.
that.
Yeah, no. So finding, yeah, adapting to changes in work life balance. As I say, it's not about having the structured routine and this thing. It's about looking at the situation and figuring out something workable.
Yeah.
Not perfect. I don't make the walk every day, but I don't beat myself up about not making the walk every day.
Totally. I can totally relate to
Um,
that. And I think also just going back to, redefining work-life balance as an energy balance. And that means you have to keep doing almost like a check-in and you readjust. It's always like this dance of
Absolutely.
adapting to what's happening around you. And I totally agree. Like, even though I've had all this routine for the last couple of months, there are times when I shift that around, or I find that if I take the same walk, I feel a bit bored. So I'll take the glass down, or I'll take my bicycle down, and that way, mixing it up a little
Absolutely.
bit. So, yeah, that's super, super helpful.
Yeah.
Before I interrupted you, you're going to tell me about how you got into sustain the hustle.
So one of the good things about moving to home office is I don't have to spend an hour and a half in traffic every day
Mm-hmm.
driving to work. And so what that means is I had time to think about things in a way that I hadn't before. I was listening to this radio interview, I think it was on 702, with this entrepreneur who was talking about burnout and about how this kind of new online life has caused, and sort of the stress of the pandemic and the complete change in the way we do business and in what businesses can actually function and what businesses are on hold was causing extreme stress to entrepreneurs. And this person was a therapist, and he was talking about how many of his clients were dealing with severe burnout and severe fatigue, and not knowing where to turn to for help in this kind of environment, and not necessarily therapy help, because there's a difference between therapy and coaching and coming through burnout. So therapy is very sort of backward looking, and it's looking at how past trauma and how past experiences are holding you back in the present and trying to
Okay.
unlock those. Whereas burnout therapy and coaching is looking at where you are now and how to change so that you can recover going forward and build the life that you want going forward. And, it was the first time that I'd ever thought of it after having been through it. Listening to this interview and to the tips that he was sharing and just the scale of the problem that he was describing, I thought, wow, I have been working like an absolute dog. I have been pulling long hours because what happened when the lockdown happened is there was a lot of funding for the sort of green stimulus, green recovery, and our organization was perfectly placed. And so we had lots of donor money. We had lots of projects. It was all kicking off at the same time. Our team was small. We were expanding. There was a lot going on. And after, 5 or 6 months of working under that extreme pressure, I was still okay because I had this 5 years of building up this understanding and this routine of coping, and not only of coping, but of managing stress in a way that allows you to stay healthy and to stay, functional, but also to keep thriving as you work so hard. And I thought, wow, I have something to offer here. This is something I can help people with, because it's not
Yeah.
rocket science, and it just requires somebody to help you make the mindset shift. Like, think about your energy as a bank account. That was probably the most fundamental like mindset shift
Mm.
that I made that has helped me cope with this kind of stress. And the other one is around stress. And this idea that if you think about how our bodies on a physiological level respond to stress, whether it's a work deadline, whether you're being chased by a lion, or whether you're about to get hit by a car, like the stress
Yeah.
response is the same. And so and the way it works is you get very stressed, your body, fills you with adrenaline, you power through it, you survive, and then you're supposed to calm down and relax and
Recover.
recover. You go from this fight or flight to rest and digest state.
Hmm.
And the challenge that people are going through and that I went through, is that you're under so much stress that you stay stuck in this fight or flight response of your body. And that response is psychological, but it's also physiological. And helping, people to understand that you like physiologically have to get the stress out of your body. You have to like press the reset button to go back into that rest digest
Yeah.
state arguably on a daily basis, or at least on a weekly basis. Like if you work intensely 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, do not touch work on the weekend. Like you must find that rest and
Yeah.
digest space. Understanding those two things and how those two very simple shifts can help people. Listening to that podcast, I just decided, you know what?
Yeah.
This is it. I'm going to do it. And because I had the time, I started waking up at 5 every morning, making sure I go to bed at 9 every night. And between 5:30 and 7, I enrolled in a business coaching course and decided to set up a side hustle. And so that is sort of how we're here.
That's really, really cool. And I'm just looking forward to also sharing all the links to sustain the hustle. And you've mentioned something that I feel is becoming a pattern with a lot of my guests, a lot of the people who have adapt stories, is an accountability coach once shared that when you see a sign, take action. And she said that was one of her most helpful things. And that's how she got into coaching. So I think
Absolutely.
you're another example of how
Absolutely.
you saw a sign and you took action. Because I mean, you could have, my gosh, there is a market for that. And then 5 years later, maybe start
Absolutely.
something. So well done to you for doing that.
Thank you. And I think for anybody, struggling with that taking action step, it's one of the key things that I learned around that to build on the point that you've made now, is that sometimes people wait for motivation to
Yeah.
fall out of the sky. I know I've waited. I've actually wanted to do this side hustle thing for a long time. And one of the things I've learned along the way is that motivation doesn't come from the sky. It's not something that's just going to suddenly be there
Yeah.
with you. It comes from taking action. And so once you take that first action, you can then build on it and build on it and build on it. And that's, fundamentally how you get to overcoming burnout or building a side hustle, getting into your career. It's that action point is key. I'm so
Yeah,
glad you
no,
brought
that's
it up.
spot on. I mean, this is why I appreciate this podcast so much, because it's so relevant to my own life. Is there anything that like really surprised you about sustain the hustle and coaching? Also just sharing your own story, because you do it really well, I must say. Thanks for that. I think you've probably had to do this over and over and over again. I can tell that you have experience in sharing your story, but also in sharing it clearly and succinctly. And I appreciate that.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think there are a couple of things actually. The one is around setting up like a side hustle. And I think you've maybe experienced this as well, going into the podcast and dedicating time for it. I did not realize how much work it was going to be. I really went into this thinking it'll be so easy. I'll put some posts up on social media and then I'll have clients and then I'll be earning tons of money and I could still do my NGO job and I don't need to fuss about promotions and raises because I have another
Exactly.
income
And you
stream.
can quit when you're ready and like fully established.
Exactly. And I'm just going to be fully established like within a couple of months and then, then what? And that was the question that really stumped me because a lot of entrepreneurs who start up a side hustle and then scale tend to quit their 9 to 5 jobs. But I really love my 9 to 5 job and I want to coach.
Yeah.
And so finding a way to balance those two has been a very interesting challenge because on the one hand, you can't be half in on the sustainability side. Like you can't
Yeah.
wing it. It's quite a big challenge and it's quite important work.
Yes.
And the same when you're coaching somebody, they don't come to you because they want half of your attention. They come to you because you've offered a solution and they want the change and the growth that
Absolutely.
you can
Yeah.
help them achieve. So I think that was probably the biggest surprise for me. Probably, I don't know why it came as such a surprise, but definitely no regrets.
Yeah.
No, no. And even, sort of crafting a social media post. I cannot tell you how many hours I have spent agonizing over how to phrase a sentence
Yeah.
on a post.
Yeah. No, incredibly. Is there something that you maybe think has been a golden thread, even though every client you have has a different context, of course? You already have a certain demographic, you already have people who are generally ambitious. They don't need
Mhm.
any motivation from you. They're looking to take a step back, actually. So the opposite of they used to, like the opposite of pushing. Is that tough to do? Like to tell, because I'm finding it a bit difficult to relax with
Yes,
in general, even in my relaxed quiet time. I really have to almost try hard to
absolutely.
relax.
Absolutely. And you've touched on the demographic of people that I help, and I think another common thread is that they're often very A-type personalities, and so they don't want to only do everything; they want to win at everything. They want to do it all really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I laughed actually because I was working with a client, and I was like, "All right, let's develop a workable routine so that you can have the time to do everything that you want to do."
Yeah.
And suddenly, like the focus was on let's build the best routine that has ever existed. And I had to say to them, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not stress ourselves out about the perfectness of this routine. Let's find something that works.
Yeah.
And, even as a person who was very busy, like before the burnout, and having to really learn that being busy doesn't help was a big lesson. So busyness is not productivity.
Yeah.
And that is something that is common, I think, across my clients. And so this idea that resting is not wasting time is another big thing that people can sometimes struggle with. So you could be watching TV and this person's like, okay, well, this is really great, but like, what am I getting from it? Like, how is it
Exactly.
helping?
And I
And
actually
so,
want to repeat this very slowly for myself. Busyness is not productivity. And also, resting is not a waste of time. Like, I probably need to repeat that and meditate on it because, it sounds so simple, but I cannot tell you how many times I feel guilty for just not doing anything. And then I work myself up
absolutely.
so much because of that. And then I end up actually wasting time because I never took the time to really rest. So,
Yep. You end up procrastinating because you end up being overwhelmed, and then you end up being angry with yourself because you're overwhelmed, and then you procrastinate and you're angry with yourself for procrastinating because you got overwhelmed because you didn't. It's a vicious
what do you
cycle.
say, Geeta, about a perspective that says, well, we're just a group of millennials who are never satisfied with everything, and we have an idealistic view of life, and so we can't face the reality of real life, and that's why we're becoming like a burnt out generation, a generation that's never satisfied with their jobs, a generation that seek meaning, a generation. I mean, I just quit my job and this is the second time, and I feel like,
Mhm.
well, is there a job where I will actually stay for at least 5 years? What do you say to that perspective?
Yeah. Look, this is something that resonates with me quite a lot, and I think it talks to perceptions that other generations have of millennials being largely maybe not the most positive. As you say, we're the generation that's never satisfied. We're the generation that, if I think about it in the workspace, the way some of my colleagues talk about millennials, it's like it's such a millennial attitude. Like, we worked here for a long time before we got promoted. Like, what makes you think you're just going to walk in and change the whole situation? Like, what is? And I think millennials, if I share my personal opinion now, we were raised on things like Walt Disney and all of those beautiful movies about deep change stories that characters went through, and hardship and
Yeah,
overcoming and personal growth being a key theme.
yeah,
And so my perspective on millennials would be, yes, we can be pretty difficult in the workspace, but we're here to shake things up, because what we see about how things have been working for the whole time is that it's caused a lot of damage to people and to the world. And maybe this is my sustainability bias coming in here, but I would say that millennials on the whole, generalizing like a lot here, I think the quest for meaning is one thing, but it's often tied into a quest to try and improve the world that we're inheriting from previous generations.
mm,
And so my perspective is fight that fight, let's be the ones to build a better future. In order to build the societies that we have today, it's taken a big toll on the state of the planet, the health of the planet, and on the health of families, on the health of people. And I think we're one of the first generations that is really comfortable with saying that I have a
yeah,
therapist. I
yeah,
see her once a week. It's really, how is there something wrong with that? And how can it be seen as something that, I may not be satisfied with where I am at the moment, but what's wrong with trying to improve? What's wrong with trying to have a therapist and work through some of the challenges that I've had so that I can give back as much as I can to this beautiful world that we're inheriting and that we're wanting to kind of fix
yeah.
a little bit, you know? And so I think there are very positive things about millennials. And I think we have a lot to offer in the workplace, and with the emergence of tech and how much easier it is to set up online businesses and things, there's so much opportunity to find that meaning and to find that work that really inspires you.
Yeah.
Because we're not in a situation anymore where we are dependent on that one factory job in our village that is going to, obviously speaking from a point of privilege here, we're not necessarily, there are alternatives if you have access to the internet, if you have access to devices and things like that, and you can give back.
Yeah.
Why not?
And I think
Right.
also just what you mentioned at the end is definitely like a touch of South African context where you are aware of different groupings in class and like privilege. So that's pretty refreshing to hear.
Yeah, and I had wanted to start this kind of this interview a little bit, particularly around my story, with a little caveat saying that although I'd had this burnout, journey, and it's something that I talk about a lot, it's not necessarily something that I would want to come across as very privileged person complaining about her privileged life,
How tough it's been.
how tough it's been. But maybe another sort of important thing for millennials to think about as they're going through their own personal change and personal growth stories is that, particularly around burnout, you often think, oh well, I'm not suffering the most here, like I can
Yeah.
just keep going, I can keep pushing on, I can keep slugging on. And yes, you may be under huge amounts of pressure, but you may still have a house, you may still have 3 square meals a day, you may have your own car or whatever it is. But that stress and that struggle is still real. And if it's something that you want to overcome, it is helpful to acknowledge that and to find the help to get through it without beating yourself up about not being in the worst position that you could be. Things can
Yeah.
always be worse.
Absolutely. Very well said. Yeah, I really, really like that. And just to also share that I mean, I feel that as well. And even with this podcast, I thought, well, there isn't really a problem because I'm having issues about meaning and how my career plugs into my meaning. And the types of topics that I question or I struggle with are like first world problems almost, or they're considered to be. But actually, personally, they're not first world problems. Personally, they affect me and they do matter.
Yeah,
They affect how I show up, they affect how I experience life. So I guess you can still acknowledge privilege and still also acknowledge that our issues do matter, whichever bracket you're in.
absolutely. And that's not to say that people who are in less privileged positions of privilege don't have these.
And yeah, that's a very good point. It's just that the priority of issues might just be different. Where if you're worried about
Exactly.
where your next meal will come from, you might be suffering from burnout, but I guess because of the pressure of survival, then you have to have a survival mindset. And that in itself is also a big stressor, having a survival mindset.
Absolutely.
I could sit here with you for like hours and hours.
That is a fantastic
Yeah, I
conversation.
really absolutely love this conversation and also how open you've been about it. I feel like I've absorbed and learned so much as well. But Yuta, I just wanted to also say, I'd say I'm just going towards the end, is what would you like to share with somebody who is listening and maybe they are in a similar position? They might not have had the same symptoms, or maybe they haven't had a total collapse, but they feel like they are going towards this and no one else can recognize it. They're not sure how to put it into words, but they suddenly feeling this heaviness or any of the symptoms you've mentioned, and they have absolutely no prior knowledge about how to go about it. What would be the first step, just the first critical step in the right direction?
Sure, that's a big question. I think as a first step to just find 20 minutes, 20 quiet minutes that you could spend with yourself. To sit down and say to yourself, okay, what is actually happening here?
Mhm.
Like without judgment and with a lot of grace for yourself, because you're going to give yourself that 20 minutes and you're immediately going to think, oh, it's really not that bad. It's fine. Everything's fine. We're going to just keep going. Don't put all of those thoughts aside. If you could see your friend, your best friend in the position that you're in now, and you wanted to help them, and you went and you sat with them and you said to them, what's happening? How can we, how can we help? Ask yourself that question with the same level of openness and understanding that you would a friend, without judgment and with giving yourself the grace to answer honestly,
Mm.
and write down what comes up for you. Because often we know what is stressing us out. And if we give ourselves the chance to reflect on it, we might see, okay, actually, this job is sucking my soul. Or actually, I don't love this person. Or, thinking about what these hard truths might be. You don't have to act on it. You don't have to do anything. But giving yourself the space to just think through the answer of that question. It might be like, I feel sick eating everything. Like maybe I'm allergic to food. Whatever it is, just get the answer and then start to think about, okay, if this is kind of what I'm feeling, if this is what is wrong, how can I find support to help me through it? Because you don't have to carry it on your own. You don't have to be everything to everyone. There are people out there. There are programs out there. There is information out there that can help you. And getting to that point where you show yourself that compassion and you think to yourself, okay, I'm in my corner. I'm here to help me and I'm here to look after me and I can do it. You're unstoppable because that realization will lead you down a path of finding out how to get better. And that means you're not being told by people who don't understand your context what to do. You're not having to take medication that you're not really sure is going to help you. You're not at somebody else's mercy in that process. You become your own advocate for healing. And making that connection with yourself, I would say, is very much the first step for me. It was the first step for me, and it's the first step that I've encouraged my clients to work through.
Also, once again, very well said, and also exactly the words that the accountability coach that I interviewed said is to listen to yourself, take the time to listen to yourself as the first
Yeah.
step. So, yeah, wow.
And that step doesn't cost anything. It's free. And so whatever situation you're in, it is applicable. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just acknowledging that there's help. You don't have to be the soldier.
Thanks so much for that. You don't have to always be strong.
Exactly.
This conversation has really been helpful for me, and I'm going to check where my energy balance is, what I want to focus on, etc. Where can someone find you if they would like to consult you?
Yeah. So I would say I'm most active on Instagram. So there is the Facebook page called Sustain the Hustle, and you're very welcome to follow there. But given, balancing work and everything and social media is a lot, I dedicate a lot of my a lot of my time and energy to Instagram. And the handle is Geeta Sarah Coaching.
Okay.
So that's GEETA and Sarah SARA and coaching. All one word, and there's no H at the end of Sarah.
Thanks so much for that. I will also share the link later on when I publish this session. Thanks so much, Geeta. Like, really, I would really love to have a coffee with you when I come home.
Definitely. I'd love to see you again.
And when you're not available, that's also fine because I know, like, you're balancing your energy and stuff.
I will all time to see you.
Thanks so much. And I'm really, really glad that we've had this conversation. Thanks for making the time. I wish you all the best with your project. And I think it's just going to be
Thank you.
something that I'll keep tabs on because I think it's so relevant. And the fact that it's so personal as well. So it sounds like you are pouring yourself into it. It's you've experienced it and it's so relevant. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to all the listeners.